In order to start the rule of thirds lesson, we're first going to talk about some rule of thirds being put into action with famous photographs, famous paintings, and later on we'll talk about how the rule of thirds is used in advertising. So usually I have this displayed on the board and I tell you to jot down a couple of things you know about each of the images that you see because we'll be discussing them. A lot of times I learn from you all, but hopefully I can teach you a thing or two or discuss some of these and how it applies to the rule of thirds. So let's start out about discussing what we know about the following photographs, paintings, and logos. The first one up is Man on the Moon. Now, several of you have seen this image, and we know that it is from a famous landing on the moon. It was actually Apollo 11, and several people will say that this image is of Neil Armstrong. That's actually incorrect. Neil Armstrong is the person who took this photo, and the main subject of this picture is Buzz Aldrin. A lot of people call this image a fake. And one thing that we talk about and when we look at this image is what would lead someone to believe that? Well, the ground looks like sand. Some people have talked about the reflection in the astronaut helmet of it looking like a movie set. The sheer blackness behind it, again, looks like a Hollywood set. And so there were a lot of skeptics, and there were a lot of people who said this was kind of a conspiracy theory when it comes to the man on the moon. Then we come to Abbey Road. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is a band entitled The Beatles, and they were an iconic rock band that came from Britain. If you are unfamiliar with these gentlemen in the picture, from left to right, we have George Harrison, then Paul McCartney, then Ringo Starr, and John Lennon. What we know about the band is that they spanned several years. They made tons of music. They had a huge impact on several artists that we listen to today. Now, the interesting thing about this particular image is that it only took 10 minutes to take the picture. That is, from the time the photographer stood out in the middle of the road, there wasn't traffic, like a traffic guard. There wasn't anyone who was trying to set up this scene. The photographer actually used a ladder that he put in the intersection of the road, crawled up on top, said go. The Beatles walked across Abbey Road. He took the image, came down the ladder, took the ladder, and it was all done. So for an album cover, there wasn't a ton of time put into it. It was kind of what you see is what you get. Now, one of the interesting things about this image, or some of the little fun hidden things, is that we simply see four men in the front of the picture, but there is actually a fifth man in the image, and he is right above John Lennon's shoulder standing on the sidewalk. Later on, I think Time Magazine did an interview with that man, and he said he just thought some hippies were crossing the road, and he had no idea that he was part of such an iconic image. The other fun fact is that we see four Beatles in the foreground, but there is actually a fifth Beetle, and that's the car that is over George Harrison's shoulder, and people refer to that Volkswagen as a Beetle. One thing that is very prominent in this image, whether you pick up on it immediately or not, is that it portrays a lot of tension that was in the band at this time. If you are unfamiliar, Paul McCartney, who is the second from the left, and John Lennon, the man in the white, they were butting heads. Paul McCartney was known as the frontman of this band. He was the lead singer, he was the heartthrob. That's who people kind of flocked to. Well, John Lennon was writing a lot of songs, and he was feeling that he should be a front runner and that he should get just as much recognition. At that same time, John Lennon was dating a woman named Yoko Ono, and it is now a phrase that we sometimes hear now, probably not as popular as it used to be, was when you refer to someone as being a Yoko, you are trying to refer to them as breaking up a group or coming between a friendship. And that was taking place in the band at this time. She was kind of in John Lennon's ear saying, you are more talented and you should be the lead singer and everybody should recognize you as the face of the Beatles instead of Paul McCartney. Well, a couple of things that lead to this turmoil would be one easily thing would be the leg that they are leading with. If you look, three of the four men are walking with their left foot forward, while Paul McCartney is not walking in line with them and he is leading with his right foot. The other thing we see is the body language. George, Paul, and Ringo are all swinging their arms, walking in tandem, and John Lennon looks very closed off, has his hands in his pocket. He is also wearing white while the others are wearing dark colors. And then if you go to the bottom portion of the picture and look at their feet, everyone is wearing shoes except for Paul McCartney. The other thing you might notice about Paul is that he is pointing downward. Some people have said that that is a cigarette or that he is actually flipping the bird at the camera. That's incorrect. He is pointing at the ground. And many people who followed the Beatles would say that this is his way of indicating that this is the downfall, that things are going down after this, and he is unhappy with the way things are. The way that this image relates to the rule of thirds is all of that space above their heads. That's called headroom, which we're going to talk about. But why was all that space left up there? Well, if this was an album cover, they had to purposely leave all of that space at the top so that they could put the name of the album, which we mentioned is Abbey Road. This image you may have seen somewhere, but maybe you're not familiar with the name. It is called Men on a Ledge, and that's because, easily enough, it's a picture of men on a ledge. This is an image of men in 1932, and they are having their lunch break on top of a skyscraper. They were actually in the process of building the GE building at Rockefeller Center. Now, this picture has a big impact because it evokes feelings of fear. When you look at this picture, whether you are afraid of heights or not, it does bring on some worries or some concerns of someone not having safety ropes, not having any type of device that levies them to the building, anything like that. And so that's why this image is so significant. We also find out about this picture that these men are sitting on the 69th floor. So in 1932, they did not have all the safety devices that we have today. You can see they're not even wearing hard hats. So if the man on the far left starts to slip, there isn't much that's going to save him or be able to help him. And then if the man on the far right starts bouncing, he's put everyone in jeopardy. And so the significance of this image when it comes to referring to the rule of thirds is that the focus isn't actually on the men themselves, but it's on the space below them, because that's what makes us, the viewers, fearful of what could happen. This picture of the kissing sailor actually appeared on the cover of Life magazine. It was taken in Times Square in 1945 on V-Day, or Victory over Japan Day. The thing that is interesting about this image is that if you looked at it and made a snap judgment, you would put together this entire love story. Maybe this nurse had been waiting for her sailor to come home. Maybe they had been writing letters back and forth while he was away. They had longed for each other. They were deeply in love, and this was the moment of passion that was captured on film. That story is lovely, but it is completely incorrect. These two individuals are actually complete strangers. The story goes that the photographer was in Times Square taking pictures after a ticker tape parade or after the big celebration when the sailors had come home, and just said, "Hey, give us a kiss." And this sailor grabbed this nurse who was with a group of friends, dipped her, kissed her, and the two of them never saw each other or never spoke again. This image is significant when it comes to the rule of thirds is because obviously we are looking at the kiss that's taking place front and center. But the interesting thing would be all of the people around them and the reactions. And it's a fun exercise to go with each person that you see in the picture and kind of put together in your head what you think they're thinking, what you think they would be saying at that time, or what the reaction was. This photograph is called Raising the Flag on Iwo Jima. It was taken in 1945 on Mount Suribachi, I could be mispronouncing that, during World War II. This image actually won the Pulitzer Prize for photography. One of the interesting things about this photograph is that it has been referred to as the most significant photo of war. I always ask the class, why do you think that is? What is it about this picture that evokes feelings, that makes those emotions come to the surface? Why would this be referred to as the most significant photo of war? I'd like for you to think about that a little, and then we're going to refer back to it when we talk about the rule of thirds grid on it. This photograph is entitled, I Have a Dream. We know that this is Martin Luther King, and he was making his famous speech during this time at the Lincoln Memorial. What we may not know is that the speech was not actually called I Have a Dream. While it did use that phrase over and over throughout it, the title of the speech was actually Normalcy Never Again. This image is very powerful. It has a lot of feelings that come behind it, and this is another one that lends itself to not only looking at the obvious subject, but looking at some of the other people that are in the photograph and trying to imagine what they're thinking, what they're feeling, or what they would say about this particular moment. This image also has another unique fact in that it has a lot of space at the top, which is what we call headroom. When we talked about the purposeful headroom in the Abbey Road image, that was because we were putting a title up of the album above it. In this one, I want you to think about what was the purpose of having that much space above Martin Luther King's head. We're going to transition from photographs to art or painted images. This one is called A Starry Night, and it was painted by Vincent van Gogh. I love the backstory behind this one, and I could talk about it for an entire class period if I needed to. But what I would like for you to know about it is that at this time, Vincent van Gogh was actually in an insane asylum, and he painted this during the day from memory. The story goes that he had cut off his ear and given it to a prostitute as a gift or as a token of his love, and this, along with other things, probably hearing voices, led him to an insane asylum. Well, at nighttime, he would look out his window of his cell, and this is what he would see. And then during the daytime, I guess during rec time or when they had a free period, he took those memories and actually made this painting. One thing that I love about this image is the obvious distraction right in the front. What is it? There are no wrong answers. I'd love to hear your opinion on what you think the big brown blob is in the front. One thing I love about this particular image is that it is actually the basis for all of our childhood drawings. I'd love to do a demonstration for you all, but if you look at the houses down at the bottom, you see the very simple shapes that we are all familiar with when we were drawing our own houses when we were in elementary school. We always did a square or a rectangle, always with a perfect triangle roof. We always had a door in the center. We always had little squares for the windows. And it looks very similar to something that we would have drawn when we were 6 or 7 years old. The other thing that emulates what our artwork looked like when we were younger would be the top of the image, and that is the sun or the moon in the top right corner, the sky filled in with as much blue as possible, and sometimes we would have clouds or wind or those swirls. So while Vincent van Gogh was an incredible artist and very talented in many ways, this image does have a lot of simplicity to it that relates to what we would have done when we were children. This is another painting that we could talk about for hours if we needed to, but it's known as the Mona Lisa. It was painted in the early 1500s by Leonardo da Vinci. The image that we see before us has a lot of stories surrounding it, a lot of conspiracy theories. I know some of you are familiar with the Da Vinci Code and some of the background information, but the painting itself was commissioned for King Francis I. There are lots of rumors that surround why he wanted this particular woman painted. One of those popular rumors is that Mona Lisa was a real woman, and this was actually his lover, and he wanted a painting to remember her. One of the other things that people talk about with this image is whether she is smiling or not. The Mona Lisa smile. Is she smirking? Is she unhappy? Is she actually smiling at us? It's kind of creepy, and you can do this with a lot of paintings, but look directly in her eyes and then lean back and forth, left to right. Her eyes will always follow you. She'll always be watching you. And so that's another thing that people have commented on when it comes to the Mona Lisa. This is a very popular painting, probably one of the most popular paintings in the world, and right now it is housed at the Louvre in Paris. Some people are surprised to find out that it is only about 11 inches by 15 inches. I don't know why we've gotten it in our head that we just imagine this gigantic portrait, but it's really not that big. It's just a little bit bigger than a piece of notebook paper. This is another one of those that has a lot of rumors surrounding it and a lot of theories on what was really taking place. Some of those theories or rumors include that this was actually a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci himself. He had painted what he would look like if he was in fact a woman. And you can find a neat little article where they take a sketch that he did of himself and the Mona Lisa and they overlay it and they look very similar. Another is that this image is from a post-apocalyptic world. If you look at the background, instead of just focusing on Mona Lisa herself, if you look in the background, it does have the instance that could be a heaven and hell. It could be that the world burned. It could be kind of a back to a prehistoric type thing, but an apocalypse had taken place and that she is one of the sole survivors. There are theories that this was taken from the future. There are theories that this painting came from another planet, that maybe Da Vinci was tied in with other people. Whatever the theory is, the thing that I want to bring attention to would be that Mona Lisa is the standard of beauty in that time. When we think of someone who is beautiful today, it's not going to be Mona Lisa. Some of the things that some of her features include she is pale, lack of eyebrows, her hair is kind of drab, not a lot of makeup, and wearing a ton of clothes. And if you look at the opposite of that, today we would like a tanner woman, usually blonde or highlighted hair. Eyebrows are all the rage right now, even though they look like they're drawn on with Sharpies sometimes, but it's makeup, it's more makeup and less clothes is usually what the standard of beauty is today. And so it's interesting to see how that's changed over the years and over the decades. But Mona Lisa at the time was it. That's what the men wanted, and that's what the women wanted to look like. When it comes to the rule of thirds, it's pretty obvious that she is centered up. She's right in the middle of the portrait itself, and that's what we should be looking at. But sometimes it's interesting to look at the things that aren't right in the obvious eyesight. When I pull up this image, some of you are going ahead and humming the theme song, ba da ba ba ba. Some of you are loving it, some of you are not, and I'm on team not loving McDonald's. But we have to give credit where credit is due. McDonald's has done an absolute stand-up job at advertising, logo, product placement. They have it going on. It is an internationally known symbol and restaurant and company as a whole. Now, the M in McDonald's, a lot of people think it's because the word starts with an M and they just made a yellow one. But it's actually referred to as the Golden Arches. Back when the original McDonald's buildings were made, if you were looking at the building straight on, it was a little square box and then it had one big arch over it. Behind that arch was another golden arch. And so the idea was that when the interstate system was becoming really popular and people were driving, they would see those two arches intersect to look like an M, but really when you were looking at the building straight on, it was just one single arch is all you would see. Well, they wanted it to be recognized from the interstate all over the world, really. That was the whole goal. And today they have accomplished that. It is known as one of the most recognized logos in the entire world. Now, McDonald's is a master of advertising, and they do this by using the rule of thirds in their logo and also with some of their amazing campaigns that they have done over the years. We all know about Happy Meals, so we know that the kids are hooked on them. We all know about their amazing fountain drinks. Their fountain drinks taste better than anybody else's. And it's because of the sugar content and the double filtered water. So McDonald's has done a lot of things over the years. The toys, the Happy Meals, the fast food, the drive-through, the family atmosphere in the 80s kind of type of thing where they get people in the door, they get people hooked, and this is what people think hamburgers are supposed to taste like and french fries are supposed to taste like. And so they're really good at advertising. The other way they're awesome at this, it kind of refers back to the way the old buildings looked. So the buildings looked like a giant M with those golden arches. Well, their logo today has incorporated that, and you can see any portion of that logo and you'll know it's McDonald's. The final image I want to talk about today would be Coca-Cola. Again, we are looking at one of the most recognized logos in the entire world. A lot of people are familiar with the Coca-Cola Museum, and that is housed in Atlanta, Georgia. And so because of that, people just assume that Coca-Cola was invented in Atlanta, Georgia. But that's incorrect. We actually have a little claim to fame because the original recipe for Coca-Cola was written right here in Columbus, Georgia. The original recipe did have traces of cocaine. I'm sure you've heard the stories of it, and it was used as an elixir. The whole idea was that if you have a cough, take a little bit of Coca-Cola. If you had a sore throat or a headache or a stomach ache, just have a little bit of Coca-Cola and it was going to make you feel good. But if you look back at it, of course it was making people feel good because it had cocaine in it. It was also making people addicted, so they would go and buy more and drink more. Obviously, the drugs have been taken out of the drink since then, but it's still something that people feel they are addicted to. They need and love the caffeine and the taste of Coca-Cola, and there are hundreds of variations of the drink today. The factory and the museum, like I mentioned, are in Atlanta, and if you've ever been, you've learned a couple of things. One unique thing about Coca-Cola is that they invented the image of the modern day Santa Claus. The red and the white would be the obvious correlation, but in their commercials that they started releasing, they would have Santa having cookies and a Coca-Cola instead of milk. And those commercials got very popular, and as the years went on, they started shaping the way that Santa looked. He was wearing that bright red with the white trim. He was a jolly old man. He had a rosy nose. He had the ho ho ho, the very hearty thing, which was not the original St. Nicholas. The other thing that Coca-Cola does that is amazing when it comes to advertising would be the subliminal messages that they give you. You can say that I'm wrong if you want, but if you look closely, there are several portions of this logo that make you thirsty. First, it's been scientifically proven that the colors red and yellow make people hungry or thirsty. And you can see they also use that in the McDonald's logo that we just discussed. The other thing that this logo does is look at those ice cubes. It is quenching my thirst. I feel that I need to go get something to drink because of the cold and the condensation and those ice cubes. And then speaking of the condensation, look very closely at those dewdrops. Every dewdrop has a tiny little smiley face on it. 2 dots in a line, 2 dots in a line. Some of them repeat, but it's almost as if they are telling us if you drink Coca-Cola, you can be happy just like us. So now let's discuss the rule of thirds and how it plays a role on the images we just saw and how we can use it for images that we take moving forward in the class. If you start with any blank slate, this could be a painting, a photograph, a frame of a video, a logo, a sketch, whatever it is, we're going to imagine that it is a blank slate. Then we are going to break that into 3 columns. So we'll have 2 lines going vertically. We are going to label those column 1, column 2, and column 3. Then going back to that same blank slate, again, a logo, a photo, an image, a painting, whatever it is, and we're then going to break it into 3 rows. So we would have 2 horizontal lines. Then we're going to label those row 1, row 2, and row 3. When we refer to a particular area of a photograph, instead of saying, oh, bottom left corner, oh, or middle, whatever, we're going to talk about it in rows and columns. So you would refer to it as maybe you're talking about a portion of the picture that is in column 2, row 3. Or you'd like to talk about something that is in column 3, row 1. Whatever it is, I'd like for us to get familiar with that terminology for this exercise. So this is the rule of thirds grid. You've seen these on your iPhone. I know Instagram has them that you can place them over a picture. It looks like a tic-tac-toe board. It kind of looks like a hashtag, but whatever it is 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines that make up the screen. And make sure that each of those columns and rows is evenly spaced. When we're talking about a hard and fast definition, the rule of thirds can be summarized by calling it a framing method. It is made up of imaginary lines that can be placed on a screen. It is a rule to help us with photography and videography. The purpose is to create an aesthetically pleasing shot. If you're unfamiliar with that word, which I think is really fun to say, aesthetically pleasing, aesthetic is relating to something that is beautiful or pleasing in appearance. So we're going to take another look at those photographs, those paintings, and those logos that we discussed before we put the rule of thirds grid on it. With each image, I would like for you to jot down in your notes, you can type them or write them, it doesn't matter, I'd like for this to be a class discussion, of where is the focus of that image. So initially, some of these pictures, we were looking at the subject. We were looking at what was front and center. But now that we put the rule of thirds grid on, where does your eye go? A lot of times for this exercise, I tell students to look away from the screen, count to 3, and then look back. And I want you to immediately tell me where your eyes go. It could be column 1, row 3. It could be column 2, row 2. It could be all of column 3. It could be all of row 2. Wherever your eye is drawn, I want you to mark that. And then when we discuss this as a class, I want to tell you what the photographer or the painter or the creator of that logo actually intended to be the focus of the picture using the rule of thirds. Before we started this exercise, I asked you to bring a photo that you could submit for discussion about the rule of thirds. It could be a full page picture, it could be something that you took, it could be an image of that you found online, it could be a piece of art that you admire. Either way, I'd like for it to fill up a full screen or a full page. Now, with that image, I asked you to apply the rule of thirds. You could draw it on there. You could use an app to put that grid on there. You could print out the picture and sketch it on there or fold it and then draw over it. However you want to portray it, I'd like for you to have that image with that rule of thirds grid put on it. Now, looking at the image with the rule of thirds grid, I'd like for you to answer the following questions. The first one, how was the rule of thirds used? The second question, what is the main focus of the picture? Remember, we're still talking in terms of columns and rows. And then finally, how did the rule of thirds grid change or impact your perception of the photograph? I'll use the astronaut as an example. When we first looked at that image, the astronaut, it was all of column 2, that's where our focus was. But after we put the grid on, maybe you noticed more of the helmet, or maybe you paid more attention to the tubing that was in column 3, row 3. So whatever your perception changed, or however your view of that picture changed, I'd like for you to note that on that third question in terms of the image that you've submitted for this exercise.